Hi guys and welcome back. Today I am working on a watercolor painting and I want to talk about a topic that I actually really love thinking about implementing, and I don't think I've actually talked really about it in depth before, and that's this concept of stars and dots. At least that's what one of my teachers called it way back in college. But yeah, it's this concept of all of these finalizing details that go into a piece at the end that really just completely transform and basically make the piece what it is. And I love this concept. I love thinking about it because I have seen it so many times in my own pieces where I've gotten it like 98% done and it's pretty much there and it feels flat and it feels like there's something missing. It's just not, doesn't have that impact that I wanted. And yeah, and then when I remember this little concept, this idea to look for those moments that you can add these stars and dots or whatever the detail ends up being into your piece, they end up really shining, and then the piece comes together and there's just this little spark there that wasn't there before. And I find that kind of thing so exciting when it doesn't take very much at all to completely transform a piece like that. So yeah, I just want to talk a bit about implementing that kind of thinking and those details and looking for where you can add those details. But yeah, so let's just jump right in. So there's really two ways to come about the ideas for the details that you want to put in to finalize it. You can either be really upfront with it and thinking about it and planning about it from the very beginning and planning those out as you work on the piece, which I highly suggest you do this anyways. This is what I like to do. I like to make sure that I'm thinking about it in the sketching phase. What are some little details that can show up that can really polish it? And I'm talking about like highlights, little tiny details, like tiny hairs that are maybe like a flyaway and then reconnect with hair later on. Things like that that may not necessarily show up in the sketch, but can be in the painting as I'm working on it or in those final steps. But probably my favorite moments are the ones that I don't have planned, that I haven't preconceived until I get to the point where I'm at the end of the painting, I'm looking at it, and it just doesn't feel like it's complete, like there's something missing, and then that detail comes to me and I can add it, and then it just feels like that piece comes alive, and that part is really exciting, but a little less easy to control. But I find that using both of these methods, being open to discovery as you work on your piece, but also putting in the thought as you're working on it, can really make sure that those details end up working together. And I find that, again, when I'm planning things better, it also means that I'm thinking about those kind of details. So I'm a little bit more prepped to think of a detail on the fly at the very end of a piece that'll work with it. And one of my favorite places to find ideas for these details, these elements that I can add to a piece to really kick them up, is actually from reference photos. I love being able to look through some reference photos for specific elements that are in my piece and find realistic details that are present in there and that I can use and manipulate and sometimes enhance much more in my piece so that it just really makes that moment shine a little bit more. So like highlights in the eyes, being able to look at references for specific shapes and specific ways that the light interacts with the eyes. Or like in this piece, eventually I will get to it, but there's little icicles that are frozen to her fingers, and I was looking at lots of references of ice and how the sun shines on snow. So I was able to get this inspiration for little tiny highlights that build up so that it has this almost shimmering effect. And that was something that came from the references that I was looking at. And like the little flyaway hairs, those little tiny details that sometimes our brain omits when we're looking at references, and we don't always really notice them and take note of them and bring them into our sketches. If we're really searching for those, it can help inspire ideas of where you can put in more detail and put in more emphasis. And one of the things that I've added to my own arsenal of stars and dots for the end is upping the contrast in certain areas. This is something that I'm trying to work on as I'm working on the actual piece, but I have noticed that there's certain areas that I tend to not push the shadows dark enough, and I want to fix that in the painting process itself, but when it comes time to this phase where I'm finished with the piece and it doesn't feel like it's really just hooking it and finishing it off, that can oftentimes be the solution. So I like to remember that one and look for any areas that could have a darker shadow so that it really just makes a certain area pop. Or also, of course, the areas where I can add a really sharp highlight so that it brings up that really light point and it brings it out of the rest of the shape. And watercolors really are very difficult to add in those lighter values after the fact. That's why they always suggest that you work from light to dark so that you can hopefully preserve the lightest areas that you want. But sometimes there are areas where I wish there was a highlight, and I actually use acrylic gouache. I used to use artist gouache, but I found that it had a bit more of like a chalky look to it, and the acrylic gouache that I've been using tends to preserve the like crisp whiteness that I like out of it. But you can also mix in other colors so that it's not necessarily a pure white, so you can still achieve, say, like a blue tinged highlight or whatever you might be looking for. But yeah, that is something that I tend to use pretty relatively sparingly, and it tends to be much more harsh lighting where it doesn't blend into the surrounding area very, very much, so that it can just be this nice, sharp, clean highlight. But that's one of the ways that I like to add highlights back into it. But that method does work perfectly for when I'm, say, adding stars, literal stars, to a piece. This one, I actually do that. I go and add stars to the sky above the character. And I love adding in a few different colors to the stars so that there's like white stars and a little bit bluer stars. But anyways, yeah, this method of using the gouache works really well for a lot of the highlights that I like to add, and a lot of the things that end up being those finishing details that I love. And of course, these can be, the stars and the dots can be actual just like details that you add in. I have had that happen so many times where I get to the end and it feels like it's just missing that spark. Again, it's just not quite there. And I like to go back and think about the story. What's the story that I'm trying to tell? Are there details that could really push that narrative a little bit more, that could hint at more of a story or enhance something that maybe I had intended to be there, but it wasn't really being pushed as much. I love being able to find things like that, because those seem to be the ones that are the most rewarding, when I can tell more of a story with these details. And a lot of times I find that the details that I like to add like that tend to be the things that are a little bit spookier and creepier, and it takes the edge up a little bit on my pieces, which I like. That tends to make me happier with the piece. And then when I'm looking at it and I can add that final little detail at the end, it's just really exciting to feel like I can connect a little bit more with it. But yeah, I definitely recommend that you sit down and think about really what were you trying to say with this piece, or whatever piece you're working on. What are the motives of the character? What are they struggling with? And what are details that can help tell that? But this is a process that just, the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more you have in your brain that you can pull out and use in future pieces. The more ideas you have, or potentially even the easier it is to come up with ideas that are well tailored for the specific piece that you're working on. And the more that you work with your mediums of choice, the more you can understand how to add those details in and how to get the look that you want, whatever that medium is, whether it's oils or watercolors or digital. You'll be able to start really getting more comfortable with that, and with adding in those things as you go on the fly. I love that. I love that process. It's so exciting to be able to come up with something that really connects me to the piece just a little bit more. But yeah, I feel like with everything in art, it just comes down to practice, to thinking about it more, to giving it a little bit more consideration and time. So one detail that I decided to add to this piece that I thought about last minute was actually a little string that's tied to her hand that's above the ice that twists down below the ice and then twists around her arm. And you'll actually see this on the final piece at the end. But this detail I didn't think about until the very end, but I wanted something that would tie together the value of her dress with the top of the painting. And I love the idea of tying a string around her finger to preserve a memory, to help you remember something. So I felt like that detail both pushed the contrast and it also had a little bit more storytelling to it. And I do have Remember available as a print, and I have the original painting available at my shop. There's a link down in the description that'll take you over there if you're interested. I really love how it turned out. I loved working on it, and I loved thinking about all of the little details that I could put in to finish it off and really make it the way that I wanted it to look. But yeah, as always, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. I can't thank you enough for the support you've given me, especially over this last year. Now we're finally out of it. I just am so grateful for everyone who showed me support, whether it was on Patreon or here watching my videos or supporting my store or just anything. There's so many ways that you can show support, and I am grateful for all of it. So thank you guys. You are amazing. but yeah, that's it for today. So I will be back next time with another art video, and I'll see you guys then.